Thank you very much, and thank you for facilitating our virtual participation in this conference. We're very sorry that we can't be with you in person, but we're joining you, the three of us, around this table here from COP26 in Glasgow, and in the sort of basement of the Glasgow Science Centre, which is currently the COP26 Green Zone, where myself, Henry, who's on the end of the table, Colin Sterling, who's one of the people that will be on your screen in front of you, and I have curated an exhibition in partnership with the Glasgow Science Centre, and we're really pleased to have Emma Woodham sitting between us in the same room, based on an international public and ideas competition called Reimagining Museums for Climate Action. And the exhibition and the research project of which it's a part aims to inspire radical changes in the museum sector to address the climate emergency in advance of, during and after COP26. And this keynote panel involves a number of different people involved in different roles in the project. Myself, Rodney Harrison, Professor of Heritage Study at University College London, and Colin Sterling at the University of Amsterdam as co-leads, and with Henry McGhie curating tomorrow on my left here as the kind of three core people in the project. Miranda, Massie, director of the Climate Museum New York, who was one of the jury members who helped us to select the 8 proposals from the 270 odd proposals that we received in response to the competition call from 50 different countries. We're hoping that Miranda will be able to beam in miraculously. She hasn't quite gotten online yet, but we're still hoping that she may yet join us. Emma Woodham, who's sitting next to me here, who's the Climate Change Programme Manager at the Glasgow Science Centre, who partnered with us to develop the exhibition, which has been on show since the Science Centre reopened to the public in June 2021, and will remain in place until the end of COP22. And Walter Lowande and João Francisco Rodrigues from the Federal University of Alfenas in Brazil, who were part of a team which contributed to the ideas competition and the exhibition, and they'll speak about their particular project and their experience as part of Reimagining Museums for Climate Action. And we want to use the exhibition and the competition and our experiences here at COP26 to collectively reflect on the roles of museums in the climate emergency and how they might need to change to facilitate action for climate empowerment. I'm just going to put my slides up because I wanted to begin. I wanted to begin by saying something about the impetus for the project and to give it some context. It's now very clear that every part of society will need to change to address the challenges of the climate emergency. And while they might not always feel like the most obvious starting point in this discussion, we believe that museums have a vital role to play in addressing the challenges of the climate emergency and in this transformation, and that every museum can play a vital part in the shift to a low or zero carbon future. Recent years have seen an increasing number of initiatives focused on climate change across science, art, natural history and ethnographic museums, with exhibitions, events, festivals, national and international partnerships aimed at raising awareness and shifting narratives. And you're seeing some slides from the exhibition here in front of you. New forms of activist-led museum, of which the Climate Museum is one, have emerged to confront the causes and consequences of climate change. Some museums have made public declarations of their intentions to reduce their carbon footprints and contribute to climate action. And activist groups have challenged museum practice, for example, around sponsorship from fossil fuel companies. And at the same time, museums continue to consume huge amounts of energy and produce large volumes of waste. They're not moving fast enough, and they'll need to rapidly decarbonise to play their part in the necessary transition to a low carbon future. All museums will be impacted by climate change, although to varying degrees and in different ways. And museums will need to shift their emphasis away from benchmarking success against economic growth, expansion, and high carbon activities such as increased international travel and touring exhibitions, and to consider success which is benchmarked instead against their ability to facilitate widespread and rapid forms of climate action. Okay, I'm now going to pass to Henry McGhie, who will speak about the Paris Agreement and Action for Climate Empowerment and how they relate to museums.
Okay, thanks, Rodney, for the introduction there, and thank you for the opportunity to be doing this. Might seem like a slightly strange panel from where we're here in Glasgow. And I work on museums and sustainable development agendas, and I just thought I'd mention some of these here, that you may be familiar with these, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They're more than a picture. They're a series of challenges that we have to resolve together. Climate action is its own goal there in Goal 13, but climate change is very closely related to all of the other challenges. The challenges are really, really connected. And I write these guides that you can get for free, that they're all about various sustainable development aspects, disaster risk reduction, human rights, and just using the sustainable development goals as a whole. Because climate action is really about human rights. It's about acknowledging the connection between each of us, all of us, the past, the present, and the future. Okay, so just to give a kind of bit of a background, and for those of you who are not so familiar with what this thing, COP26, what is it? So really, the best way to think about this is that this work doesn't come from nowhere. This is the latest stage in a kind of 50 or even 70-year long battle, challenge, to try to get the world on a path to a sustainable future. So there was the very famous Rio Earth Summit in 1992, and it generated 3 conventions. One of them was the Convention on Biological Diversity, is probably the best known one. The Convention to Combat Desertification, which is the least known one. And in the middle is something called the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And at that time, the aim was to stop the increase in greenhouse gas emissions, to stop the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases, which there are really 6. And so the countries that all signed up to that in 1992 are referred to as the parties. And so they agreed in that convention to meet each year to monitor progress and make new plans to make sure that we are on track. And so because so this year is their 26th meeting, so it's called COP26, the Conference of the Parties. There's actually a COP for all conventions, but the one for climate change is the best known. And we can say that museums have often been involved in the public aspects of COP. So we can see at the bottom image there is the Prado from COP25 in 2019, where museums have been used to raise awareness. But museums are actually much more involved than that. That museums, cultural and educational institutions were included in something called the Work Programme for the Paris Agreement, the Katowice package, at COP24 in 2018. So that means that the world's governments already accept that museums, cultural and educational institutions really have an important role to play. And the next year in 2019, ICOM, which is the international organization covering the world's museums and museum workers, adopted 2 resolutions about sustainability using the Sustainable Development Goals. But we can say that there is some activity taking place in museums and eco-museums and in networks such as the Museums Association, but nonetheless global emissions continue to rise, and that just can't continue. And so just to conclude my section here is that this is within the original Framework Convention from 1992, it talks about the importance of this thing, which we now call Action for Climate Empowerment, which is made up of 6 elements, which are regarded as being equally important, that all of them need to be supported. Education on climate change matters, not just in schools, but lifelong. Training of staff so that they're effective ambassadors for climate action and they're empowered to empower others. Public awareness, which doesn't just talk about the problems, but helps people understand the different responses and opportunities. Public participation in climate change and decisions and matters builds the mandate for increased ambition is extremely important. It can't just be a top-down approach, it has to be a participatory one. Public access to information is about transparency and justice. And the last one is around international cooperation on climate change matters. And so although these were primarily set out for countries, they also, of course, apply across all sectors and working with other sectors. And so I'll pass on to Colin to talk about the next section. Thank you.
Many thanks, Henry and Rodney. And thanks to the organisers for hosting this panel as part of the conference. It's been very strange following both COP and the MA from afar, mainly via Twitter, I must admit. And I've only been able to catch snippets of some of the urgent conversations that seem to be unfolding at both locations. But hopefully this short panel, we can add to those voices calling for radical change in the sector and beyond. Radical change, though, is not something that comes easily to museums, I feel. And yet, in the face of the climate emergency, this change is already upon us. And this has kind of underpinned the project. It will be felt and experienced differently by different institutions in different places, but the change of climate change is already seeping into everything museums do, from collecting and interpretation to outreach and digitization. As Rodney and I put it in our introduction to the Reimagining Museums for Climate Action book, there is a sense that we may well be at an epistemic or even existential tipping point when it comes to museums and other cultural institutions. What has come before no longer seems fit for purpose, as the cultural infrastructures of the fossil fuel era risk being stranded in the same way as outmoded mining technologies. Against this backdrop, then, why a design competition? And more concretely, why a speculative design competition? In their book, Speculative Everything, Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby argue that speculative design thrives on imagination and aims to open up new perspectives on what are sometimes called wicked problems, to create spaces for discussion and debate about alternative ways of being and to inspire and encourage people's imaginations to flow freely. Speculative design, then, is about using possible futures as tools to better understand the present and discuss the kind of futures people actually want. And this approach underwrites everything we sought to do with the Reimagining Museums project. We aimed to expand the conversation to new constituents, to bring radical design thinking into dialogue with museological practice, and hopefully open up new perspectives on the wicked problem of climate change. And the overwhelming response to our initial call and the sheer diversity of proposals put forward for the competition highlighted a wellspring of creativity within and beyond the sector. The ideas ranged from the fantastical to the deeply practical and covered all dimensions of museum work, from recruitment to marketing. The varied futures mapped out in this process may well never come to pass, but this is not really the point of speculative thinking. What matters is rather highlighting the crucial role museums might still play in shaping more just and sustainable futures in the here and now. And this requires critique and creativity, two things that, on the evidence of our project at least, are not in short supply across the sector. I'm always very reluctant to speak generally about museums. It is something I mark my students down for all the time. But if I had one takeaway from the Reimagining Museums project, it would be this. At a time when business as usual means crisis without end, speculative thinking and radical change become less of a luxury than a necessity. Understanding how museums might contribute to this work and play an active role in the project of worldly repair must be, I think, a vital question for the field moving forwards. Over to you, Emma.
I'll pass to Emma.
Thank you. Thanks, Rodney. Thank you, Colin. I have to say it's a delight to finally be in the same room with at least some of the team that we've been working with for such a long time on this exciting exhibition. And if I can, I'd like to just take a short amount of time to talk about our experience from Glasgow Science Centre's point of view, the opportunities that working with the team and creating this exhibition has held for us, particularly in terms of reaching new audiences. So I don't know if anybody in the room has managed to visit us before, but if not, we at Glasgow Science Centre have been here in Glasgow for 21 years now, engaging with our local communities, and we're a kind of central learning resource here in Glasgow. As you'll be aware, the COP26 has now arrived on our doorstep, and with that has come a huge number of opportunities for us to continue to grow and evolve as a science centre. We have 3 floors of interactive exhibits. Our motto is that we're all scientists. We encourage everybody to engage, explore, design and innovate. And I think that's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons why we felt connected to the concept of this exhibition, in that we like to invite anybody and everyone to have ideas and to innovate. So, as I say, a number of opportunities arose through COP26 arriving on our doorstep. I think this was one of the first when the team reached out to us. And I think what was particularly exciting for us was the people that were involved, in the invitation being so open, and the opportunity to work with not only students, designers, architects, storytellers. It was very exciting for us to be able to open ourselves up to that new audience, and we jumped at the chance to work with the team and to host the exhibition. I think one of the interesting things for us, probably the first time that we've ever gone through the entire process online. We met regularly, and it's been fantastic working so closely with the team to see this exhibition come into a reality. I think there's a lot of flexibility that was required in that to make sure that the design was not only COVID safe, but still delivered on all of the expectations that we had for it. In terms of reaching new audiences, it's been great for myself as the climate change programme manager to really look at how we can use the exhibition as a tool to reach new people and to engage those in the climate conversation who may not usually engage with it. So to that end, first of all, to focus on young people, we've managed to, through the exhibition, work with one of the Indigenous communities who have one of the exhibitions, the successful exhibitions upstairs, and we've managed to connect that Indigenous community to one of our groups of young people who are going through our Earth Allies course. And it's been such a rich experience for them to connect with that Indigenous community and their young people, and to learn more about how climate change is affecting people in different countries. And that's been an incredible experience for them. Moving on to school groups, we managed to work together to really make a kind of version of the design competition. What we hosted online as part of our Digital Science Festival. So right now we're inviting schools from around the country to submit their own ideas of what their future science centre looks like. So it's fantastic to work with the team to create a kind of schools element to this exhibition. We've also managed to extend the exhibition into what we term underserved communities here in Glasgow, those who may have a number of barriers engaging with us normally, particularly through the Museum of Open Windows team, again, one of the winning entries, that really encourages people to go out into their local environment and gather information, and the exhibition be very much a part of their own experience and them reporting back on their own life. And that very much resonates with who we are at the Science Centre, in encouraging our communities to have a voice and to shape what it is that we're doing and saying at the Science Centre. So that's been fantastic. And lastly, it's been great to work with a number of students locally here in Glasgow who are studying museum education. It's great to have them in and to talk to them about their studies, and again to push us out of our comfort zone. To be honest, it's a very different style and a different messaging. I think these big questions, as Colin reflected on, are just so important just now in terms of our role in COP as well, that we are pushing ourselves as a science centre to address these issues and to support our learners to use their critical thinking skills, develop those skills, and project their own ideas of what we mean to them. And that's really at the heart of what we try to do here at the Science Centres, to try and listen into our communities and to be an asset to them. So it has been fantastic to work with the team, learn those new skills and really be relevant to more people as a result.
Thank you so much. So now I'm going to pass to Walter, who I think is going to speak on behalf of his team, one of the 8 groups that we worked with to develop the exhibition here at the Glasgow Science Centre.
Hi, good evening. It's a great honor to be here, so thank you for having us. I will start to read my presentation. Just a minute, please. Okay. The Reimagining Museums for Climate Action proposition was a great opportunity to think about what museums have to do with climate change. Our project aimed to welcome it by trying to answer these 3 following questions. Should a museum last forever? Do museums need to be stationary? Who can build a museum? This drawing represents how we imagined a museum as a place erected to connect people around communitarian existences and their ecological resistance. Hence, the neologism existence, since these activities are inseparable, as demonstrated by the Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Castro. This geodesic dome can be easily built from local renewable and recyclable materials and can be moved or transformed into greenhouses or even homes. As we wrote in our bid, these spaces would house a central circle for the exchange of knowledge and experiences. As the geodesic dome doesn't require structural elements such as columns, we would have freedom in distributing exhibitors, models, projection screens, and works of art throughout the space, taking advantage of this to better exchange exhibition experiences with local communities. This could be a carbon-neutral, low-cost, and transient museum alternative by which people from everywhere could make use of museum technologies to tell their own histories and to produce their own resistance networks. We would also like to talk about the most important experience we had when developing this project. The active participation of some communities of our region in the Existence project taught us how these ideas could turn into concrete climate resistance networks. The south of Minas Gerais was marked by the extermination of indigenous peoples and slavery relations of production, transforming the complex and festive biointeraction practices that existed here into monocultures. But monoculture never succeeds in extinguishing these ways of life. And even today, we can find islands of resistance among cattle pastures, coffee, transgenic soy, and sugar cane plantations. These people developed communitarian cosmoperceptions marked by ancestral heritages, which keep alive through adaptation different forms of African and Amerindian cosmologies. It is very clear how genuine is the value these people place on biodiversity, since it is constitutive of their social and religious attachments. The 3 communities which welcomed our project talked to us in their own places. All of them agreed with us about the importance of sharing their histories of resistance to an international audience, since they recognize that climate change is a planetary issue that directly impacts their daily lives. All of them already have projects to preserve the memories of their struggles, but none of them have included museums, which were still seen as a distant kind of institution, not concerned to people like them. However, all of them understand that their practices are worthy to be in a museum of the present, as said by Tuira, one of the Root of the Earth Women Collective members. Finally, all of them are looking forward to creating museums like the ones we imagine here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Walter. So I apologize that we couldn't manage to get Miranda Massie online, but I would suggest that anyone who's in the audience who's interested in this issue has a look at the work of the Climate Museum in New York. They're doing fabulous things, and they're a fabulous organisation. So just to wrap up and reflect a little bit on what we've learned from the process, and also what we've learned from being at COP26 and having this amazing opportunity to engage with both COP delegates from all over the world, as well as visitors in the Green Zone actively over this 2-week period, which has just been quite incredible. We've had sort of up to about 3,000 people a day that we've been able to, who've been able to see the exhibition and who we've been able to speak with. So I think the project shows that museums have incredible potential, both to communicate, but also, and perhaps more importantly, to become facilitators for real and radical forms of climate action, and perhaps to reach communities that they've never really been able to reach before. Through the competition and through speaking and engaging with both COP delegates and Green Zone visitors throughout the time of COP, we've learned that people outside of the sector feel that museums need to change in a number of different ways to do this. And so I wanted to end by summarising my views on this briefly. Firstly, they need to reckon with their histories and the ways in which those histories continue to play out in the present. So as ongoing discussions about the restitution of the Benin bronzes and other colonial looted objects show, and not just looted objects, but around the ownership of objects more generally, museums need to take a critical look at their histories and the role that the narratives that they've produced, narratives of human exceptionalism, hierarchical understandings of human cultures, and an emphasis on progress and civilization, have underpinned and helped to produce the current climate crisis. Secondly, museums and the heritage sector more generally needs to rapidly decarbonise. Museum buildings and their operations, especially things like touring exhibitions, are incredibly carbon intensive. Museums need to take a critical look at who they associate with and the sponsorship that they receive, as the work of Miranda's Climate Museum and activist groups like Culture Unstained are emphasising. And in addition to telling their own stories differently, they need to tell different stories. Through the project, we've learned that any museum can be a climate museum, and some of the ideas in the exhibition and the various project outputs explore how this might be done. And finally, they need to see their role very differently as facilitators for individuals and communities to catalyse and support them in taking the form of climate actions, the sorts of climate actions they wish to take, rather than as authorities. Every part of society will need to make radical changes to ensure that global heating remains below 1.5 degrees, and this includes the museums and cultural sector. Museums could, and in many cases are keen to play a leading role in these transformations. But like all of society, they'll only be able to do so if they make significant changes to the ways that they operate, the stories they tell and how they're told, the sponsorship they receive, and the ways in which they perceive their own roles in relation to the publics that they serve. I just wanted to put up a last slide. In addition to the project website, the address of which is here in front of you, which acts as a resource for museums and publics alike, we've launched 2 publications this week here at COP, the exhibition book and a museum's toolkit, both of which are available for free to download on our website. And we hope that this session has inspired you to look further into that work and the work of the other people who've spoken as part of the panel. We have about perhaps 5 to 10 minutes for questions.
I'm hoping that you can hear me. Can you hear me in Glasgow?
We can.
Marvellous. Okay.
Yes.
That's all good then. Is there anyone in the room that has a question? And hopefully you'll be able to hear the questions from us here in Liverpool, and then I'll have a look on the chat as well if people want to ask questions on the chat.
So, hello, my name's Chloe Hughes. I work for the Box in Plymouth. I'm also a rep for the Southwest. A really fascinating presentation there, and I think it really brings it home to us all how important it is that we all take action here. I'm really interested in how museums can respond as spaces of education, as spaces that facilitate communities to take action. And quite clearly through the presentation, it's incumbent on all of us to take action. But I was curious to know whether the panel would suggest particular audiences or particular communities that we should be targeting some of this work to, where we can perhaps make the greatest impact. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If any panelist would like to respond to it, please raise your hand so I can pass to you.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay, so Henry.
Hi, so I mean, just to say that, because climate action, when it says it needs everyone, it means it needs everyone. But there is no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all. We have to have to meet people from where they are at. We can't expect museums to slightly kind of force feed people to do things what they want, because that's very far from a rights-based approach. Everyone has basic rights to understand the threats that they and their family and their lives and their property face. And so we need to acknowledge this in museums, but we also need to be kind of kind and gentle to people. And so because this is a complex area, there are very well developed pedagogies around education for sustainable development, education for global citizenship, and more. And you can read about some of those in the toolkit that we developed for the project. So I think that's the way I would answer that. Thank you, Bonnie.
Is there any other panelists that would like to respond to that? Emma?
Thanks, Ronnie. Thanks for your question, Chloe. I've had the task over the last sort of 2 years of creating an engagement programme around climate science, and central to that is going out and listening to various audiences as what climate change means to them. And I think that my answer to your question would be that going out and engaging with different audiences is the first place to start, and they will let us know what they need. I think our programme in particular looks to engage with what we term underserved audiences. They may be audiences of place for communities locally here that are areas of deprivation. It might be communities of interest, maybe those with disabilities, those who we know have barriers to engaging with this conversation. And what I can certainly say is that these audiences are absolutely interested in their changing climate. They are aware of their changing climate. They're not disengaged, but there are barriers to their engagement. And it's incumbent on us, I believe, at the Science Centre here to go out there and listen to what those barriers are and do what we can do to remove them and to involve them in the conversation. So it's not so much targeting at a particular audience, but going out and listening to them and understanding what we can do to facilitate them and bring them into the conversation. And that's always an incredibly positive and valuable thing for us to do, so that we can be relevant to them and not assume what might be relevant to them.
Thank you. That's great. Are there any more questions in the room? There is a question online for you around touring exhibitions and about the great example of a key part of income generation for museums, for those that create them and for those that host them, but they have a significant carbon footprint. And does the panel have any ideas on alternative means to deliver the same outcomes without impacting on the environment quite so heavily?
I think this might be one for Henry to have a go at as well. This is something that we sort of have tried to point to in the museum's toolkit, and it's something that Henry knows quite a bit about. Yeah,
I mean, just to say, when we think about emissions, they come in what are called 3 scopes. Scope 1, which comes from the fossil fuels that you burn in your own venue, whether in the fuel tanks of vehicles or in the heating. Scope 2, that comes from the emissions associated with the generation of your electricity. But the most difficult one are the Scope 3 emissions. They're called indirect emissions. And the thing that museums are often not so aware of is that all of the emissions that come from, for instance, their visitor travel are actually part of the museum's own carbon footprint. And so just to take the question there about touring exhibitions are great so long as you ignore the environmental impacts. But the principle of sustainable development is you can't. Everything, that you have to consider people, planet and prosperity in all things. And to be honest, my kind of experience is that there are easier ways to make money than touring exhibitions. And if we are serious about, looking at the impacts we have, we just can't offset these things and say, oh, well, because they generate money, we'll just either ignore or, kind of brush away the environmental emissions. We have to think about it together. And so that's perhaps not the clearest answer, but the thing is, the first instance is to really understand the full range of impacts, the benefits and the negative impacts, and then decide what you want to do about them.
Thank you. We've got time for about one. I've got one more question. So, do we want to go to the gentleman here who had to stand up first? I think.
Thanks. Christian Bass, National Museums, Liverpool, and ICOM UK co-chair. There are now many examples of how museums do fantastic work in relation to climate change, both in terms of making their operations more sustainable, as well as in their engagement education work. And I know Henry and others have done fantastic work in the last few years to get this tabled and recognized by the United Nations and as part of the SDGs. I'm wondering if you could, if I could use your insight into the COP26 negotiations to find out whether this is actually being recognized, the efforts of museums are being recognized by the world's governments, and you know, in how far they actually take note of our efforts in the museum sector globally.
So is that me or do you want to do that? You go. So I think, as I tried to mention in my presentation, that we're that's kind of banging, fighting and pushing against an open door. So there was a thing called the Doha Work Programme that ran from 2012 to 2020, and through the looking at the next programme for that, which has been running since about 2018, the government's already acknowledged the importance of museums and cultural institutions. That was at COP24. That's already in the Paris Rulebook. It was repeated again at Madrid at COP25. And then this year, just a couple of days ago on Saturday, the new programme was announced. It's called the Glasgow Programme of Action for Climate Empowerment. It's to run for the next 10 years. And in the introductory paragraph almost, it talks about the importance of museums and cultural institutions. So that role is absolutely recognised. I think that the challenge then is like getting the museum sector to embrace it.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there would be 100 other questions, but we are out of time. So thank you for your time this evening. If we could all give the panel a round of applause. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just have a single last word then? Because we were going to pass back to the other panellists, but perhaps I can just say that in the Museums Toolkit, which we recommend that everyone reads, it's free to download from the website. All of our resources have been made freely available. But we propose 5 main pathways to climate action: reducing emissions in museums, supporting society to reduce emissions, ensuring museums are fit for the future to adapt to climate change, supporting society's adaptation, and ensuring that climate action is fair and contributes to broader sustainable development goals. So we think these are the 5 really important things that museums can do in very practical ways, and we've developed a toolkit which provides one kind of pathway and one set of guidelines about how to do this, so that we hope that it will be really broadly applicable and that we'll be able to really work together on the outcomes of COP26 moving forward.
Great, thank you very much. Lovely to see you all.